Welcome back. Before we get into more complicated concepts on reactive programming, I think it's good to go over some basic concepts. The first one is, what is a function? You probably know what a function is right now, but just in case, let me go over it again. A function is a code snippet that can be called by another code or by itself and produces a single value. This is key, right? Here we can see an example. Get number 2. Whenever we execute this function, we're going to get back synchronously the number 2. And that's it. This function cannot export anything else. Next is a promise. So what is really a promise? A promise is an object that may produce a single value in the future. It's not a function, it's an object. As we can see here, we define a new promise that after 2 seconds will produce the value number 2. So similar to the previous example where we had a function, but in this case it will return the number 2 after 2 seconds. Okay? What do they have in common? A function and a promise. They both return a single value, and this is important. So keep that in mind, because we're going to go back to that really quick. Moving on. Then we have a generator. What is a generator? Well, a generator is a function that returns an iterator object, which is used to iterate over one or multiple return values. So, see the syntax. The original function was defined just by function and then the name. This one is function asterisk. This is what makes a function a generator. As you can see, in this case, we yield the number I, whatever I is, and then I plus 10. So down there, we have a generator for 10. The first time we call the next method, which is part of the iterator object that we get in return, we get the number 10. The next time we call it, the second yield operator is called, and then we get the number 20. So the difference between a normal function and a generator function is that it can actually return multiple values over time. Right? Moving on. Okay, now we get to data producers and data consumer. What is a data producer? It's basically something that generates data, right? And a function is a good example of this. We're using the same function, get number 2, and this function is producing the number 2. Now, a consumer is any part in the code where we can actually consume the data. And here we can see an example. We define the number 2 and then we call the function. So whatever the function returns gets storage in the number 2 variable. And then we can do anything we want with it. In this case, I'm just logging the information out. Now this is the difference between a data producer and a data consumer. So data producers somehow produce data and data consumers consumes that data. Next, we have a programming model called pool. So what is the pool programming model? We know what a consumer and a producers are already. So in a pool programming model, the consumer determines when it receives data from the data producer. The producer itself is unaware of when the data will be delivered to the consumer. So let's translate that a little bit. The consumer determines when it receives data from the producer. As we can see in this example, where we say const number 2 equal get number 2, we are deciding when do we want to get that data, because the get number 2 function is synchronous. So we know anytime that we call the get number 2 function, we're going to get a value. So we are deciding when do we want to get that value. And that's what the pool programming model is all about. You decide when to get the value, because you're dealing with synchronous code. Now, we have a different programming model, which is called the push programming model. So now this is a little bit different, because in this case, the producer determines when to send data to the consumer. It's totally different. The consumer is unaware of when it will receive that data. In this case, instead of using a function, we have a promise. Remember, a promise is an object that may return a value in the future. So down there, the consumer is p.then number 2 console log number 2. So this is our consumer in this case, and what it's saying is, promise, whenever you're ready, whenever you have a value, give it to me. But the consumer really doesn't know when that's going to happen. And that's what makes the push programming model interesting, because you are reacting to events. And when you are in async environment, this is key, because you really don't know, for example, because you really don't know when you're going to get that value. For example, suppose that this is a API call. Let's say you're getting a list of products. You know when you are going to be making the call, but you really don't know when you're going to be getting the results back, or if you're even getting them back.